The early 21st century marked a turning point in global politics. The events of September 11, 2001, shook the world and provided the United States with a unique opportunity to reshape the international order. Imperial Ambitions, a collection of interviews between Noam Chomsky and David Barsamian, delves into the U.S.'s response to 9/11. Chomsky and Barsamian argue that the war on terror became a framework for the U.S. to pursue its geopolitical goals. These goals are rooted in a desire to maintain global hegemony and secure access to vital resources. The book critiques the Bush administration's foreign policy as a threat to global stability. The September 11th attacks were a tragedy, resulting in the loss of thousands of innocent lives. Chomsky and Barsamian argue that the Bush administration exploited this tragedy to expand U.S. power globally.
They used fear to justify a shift in U.S. foreign policy, embracing preemptive military action. The 2002 National Security Strategy outlined a doctrine of preemptive war. This doctrine granted the U.S. the right to use military force against perceived threats. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a result of this new imperial mindset. The Bush administration's claims about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction were misleading, aimed at securing U.S. dominance in the Middle East.
Chomsky and Barsamian argued that the war on terror is not a genuine attempt to eradicate terrorism, but rather a convenient pretext for expanding U.S. power and influence globally. They contend that the vague and open-ended nature of the war on terror allows the U.S. to justify a wide range of military interventions and other actions that serve its geopolitical interests.
The authors point to the expansion of U.S. military presence around the world in the aftermath of 9/11 as evidence of this trend. They highlight the establishment of new military bases, the increase in military spending, and the growing use of drones and special forces operations as indicators of the U.S.'s increasingly militarized approach to foreign policy. This global military footprint, they argue, is designed to project U.S. power, intimidate rivals, and secure access to strategic resources. Chomsky and Barsamian also criticize the U.S.'s close relationships with authoritarian regimes, particularly in the Middle East. They argue that the U.S. often prioritizes its own strategic interests over promoting democracy and human rights, aligning itself with repressive regimes that serve its geopolitical goals. The authors argue that the war on terror has also been used to justify a significant erosion of civil liberties within the U.S.
The Bush administration's doctrine of preventive war, as articulated in the 2002 National Security Strategy, represented a significant departure from established international norms governing the use of military force.
Chomsky and Barsamian argue that this doctrine, which allows for preemptive attacks against perceived threats, undermines the international legal order and creates a dangerous precedent for other states to follow. The authors contend that the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a prime example of the preventive war doctrine in action. They argue that the Bush administration's claims about Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction and its links to al-Qaeda were baseless and used to justify a war of aggression that violated international law. Chomsky and Barsamian also criticized the US's history of supporting Israel's military actions against its neighbors, which they view as another example of the dangers of preventive war. The authors argue that the doctrine of preventive war creates a climate of fear and mistrust in international relations, making it more difficult to address global challenges cooperatively.
Section 5. The Media's Complicity Manufacturing Consent for Empire.
Chomsky and Barsamian argue that the mainstream media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception of U.S. foreign policy and manufacturing consent for imperial ambitions.
They contend that the media often uncritically echoes government narratives, framing complex issues in simplistic terms that serve to justify U.S. actions.
The authors point to the media's coverage of the lead-up to the Iraq War as a prime example of this phenomenon.
They argue that the media largely failed to scrutinize the Bush administration's claims about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and its links to al-Qaeda, instead amplifying these claims and creating a climate of fear that made war more palatable to the public.
Chomsky and Barsamian also criticize the media's tendency to demonize U.S. adversaries, portraying them as irrational actors who pose an existential threat to the U.S.
Section 6. A History of U.S. Interventionism, from Latin America to the Middle East. Chomsky and Barsamian argue that the U.S.'s post-9/11 interventions must be understood within the broader historical context of U.S. foreign policy, which they characterize as being marked by a recurring pattern of interventionism and empire building.
They trace this pattern back to the country's founding, arguing that the pursuit of territorial expansion and economic dominance has been a constant theme in American history. The authors provide a detailed account of U.S. interventions in Latin America throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, highlighting the numerous instances where the U.S. intervened militarily or covertly to overthrow governments, prop up dictators, and protect its economic interests.
They argue that these interventions, often justified in the name of spreading democracy or combating communism, frequently resulted in instability, human rights abuses, and resentment towards the U.S. Chomsky and Barsamian also examine U.S. involvement in Southeast Asia, particularly the Vietnam War, arguing that it was another example of the disastrous consequences of U.S. interventionism.
Section 7. The Importance of Public Dissent, Challenging the Narrative of Empire. Chomsky and Barsamian emphasize the crucial role of public dissent and activism in challenging the narrative of empire and holding the government accountable for its actions.
The authors praise the anti-war movement that emerged in opposition to the Iraq War, highlighting its role in raising awareness about the Bush administration's misleading claims and the potential consequences of the invasion. They argue that this movement, while ultimately unsuccessful in preventing the war, demonstrated the power of public dissent to challenge the government's narrative and shape public opinion.
Chomsky and Barsamian encourage individuals to educate themselves about U.S. foreign policy, engage in critical thinking about government claims, and challenge the dominant narratives presented in the mainstream media. They stress the importance of supporting independent media outlets, participating in peaceful protests, and contacting elected officials to express concerns about U.S. foreign policy.
Section 8. Towards a More Just World. Recommendations for Change. While Imperial Ambitions offers a scathing critique of U.S. foreign policy, it also provides a glimmer of hope by outlining potential avenues for change. Chomsky and Barsamian argue that a more just and peaceful world is possible, but requires a fundamental shift in U.S. foreign policy, one that prioritizes diplomacy, multilateralism, and respect for international law.
The authors advocate for strengthening international institutions, such as the United Nations, and empowering them to play a more effective role in resolving disputes peacefully and holding powerful states accountable for their actions. They argue that a rules-based international order is essential for preventing conflict and addressing global challenges such as climate change, poverty, and pandemics.
Chomsky and Barsamian also stress the importance of addressing the root causes of terrorism, such as poverty, inequality, and political oppression.
Section 9. Conclusion. The enduring relevance of Imperial Ambitions. Imperial Ambitions Conversations on the Post-9/11 World remains a timely and important work, offering a critical analysis of U.S. foreign policy in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Chomsky and Barsamian's arguments about the U.S.'s embrace of a more assertive and overt imperial stance, the dangers of the preventive war doctrine, and the media's complicity in manufacturing consent for empire continue to resonate in the 21st century. The book's enduring relevance is a testament to the persistence of the issues it addresses. The U.S. continues to engage in military interventions around the world, often with devastating consequences. The war on terror continues to be used to justify a wide range of actions, from drone strikes to mass surveillance.